Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us in this crazy time that we are living in, and I'm excited to do this Q&A today and continue with this work that is so important right now. Glad to have you here. So, yeah, just wanted to tell you about a couple things that we have going on. We're going to be doing a couple discounts with our material, with Teal's material. We're doing a 35% discount on the self-love course, and that'll actually be 50% off for premium members. And yeah, we're going to have roll out a few more discounts and stuff, because we know financial stuff is really tough for everyone right now. So we're really glad to have you here and excited to continue with what we do. Yeah, so if you want to check the discounts, it's going to be tealswanofficial.com #self-love. So yeah, so right now we're going to do a 1-hour Q&A, and just to further connected to the self-love course, if you get that, we'll do another private Q&A with the people that get the self-love course at the end of the month. So another incentive. So yeah, let's get going with this. And glad to see you all and have to hear you, and look forward to reading comments and stuff. So, but
it's cramped in this room. Hello, everybody. I wish that we were meeting together today under better circumstances within the world, and yet we're not. And that I can help you guys with whatever you're struggling with. We have printed off a bunch of these questions that have been submitted. I'm going to let myself be intuitively led towards which ones to pick today, because we didn't have enough time. Obviously, there were so many questions that I didn't have enough time, and nobody on my team had enough time to go through them. So, yeah, 96 pages, you guys. 96 pages of questions. All right, so the first thing that I want about right now, I want to open this thing up about this concept of freeze. I picked this particular, where is it? Right there. I picked that particular frequency painting because this is transforming fear. Because, as you know from the blog that I wrote about 2020 missions, this is what this whole year is about. Is figuring out how to master fear. Right now is no exception. Really hard for people to master fear right now. And what happens when you get into this state of fear is you go into freeze. So a lot of people have a lot of questions about what exactly to do about that freeze state. Now, the first thing that I want to get into is the fact that right now, to expect yourself to be able to know where to go is pretty stupid. I think that, right now a lot of people expect themselves to make decisions without fearing regret, or they expect themselves to not be in that state of fight or flight, or not be in that state of freeze, and it's dumb to expect that of yourself, because what you're facing right now is complete uncertainty. What you're facing right now is information changing by the second. And the thing about having information change like that is that you can't really make a solid decision on anything if the information is changing every 10 seconds. Mostly, if the president got on today and said, this is going to last, and you're going to be in quarantine all the way through fall, you'd obviously be making different choices, wouldn't you, than for a 2-week quarantine. So I want you to know that it's super normal and natural to be in a freeze and to not know what to choose when the information is so up in the air like that. When the information is up in the air to that degree, the only thing you can do is this: to prepare for the worst, while at the same time focusing your energy, after you've done that preparation, on what you want to create. The best energy that I probably describe to you to illustrate this concept is when an architect builds a building. Let's say that they create that building with earthquakes in mind. So they're actually preparing for the worst. I'm going to design and create this building as if the worst case scenario happens. However, even though inserting that into their building plan, it's not like the whole time they're building, they're in a state of panic. They're still creating what they want to see. So if you can use that example as a metaphor for the type of energy to be in today, the best thing you can possibly do. I thought you feel like this freeze is a really, really bad thing, when actually it's smart when you don't have all the information. Like I said, you got to prepare for the worst. However, you don't want rash decisions right now. Many of you watched that update that I did yesterday, where I said that the most dangerous thing you can do right now is to be in a state of reactivity. That reaction of reactivity makes people incredibly unsafe right now. So that freeze is a natural response, one would even say intuitive right now, to the deep visceral knowing that you don't have information to take a move. So yesterday in the update, I conveyed a concept I want to convey again. It's that right now the mud is up in the water. Any of you who've played in the lake, or even with the bottom half of an ocean, when you step, all of this sediment comes floating up through the water. And it's cloudy, you can't see well. So it's super, super critical when the mud is up in the air like that you don't make a move, because you can't see well what you're doing. There's no clarity. So that freeze can actually be serving you right now to stop where you are and to let that mud settle, so that you're making your decisions in your life based on deep internal knowing. Some of you are really confused right now about what to do, making decisions, because a lot of your decision making is run by fear. So people are like, well, I don't really know, like, when a decision I'm making is a knee-jerk reaction because of a negative emotion, or a knee-jerk because of a positive emotion. What I want you to remember is that intuition it's an interesting sensation because it's pretty void of what we would label as an emotion. Those really heightened, supercharged level emotions, whether they're positive or negative, that's not intuition. Intuition is this very deep knowing, and it may come with certain sensations, but there's stableness to it. So I want you to understand that if you're in any of buzzing, a lot of movement type of energies within your body, that's not intuition. Intuition is going to be a lot of movement, actually. Like I said, it's that deep, grounded, internal, belly-like knowing, as opposed to emotions that happen in the upper half of your body, especially if your neck is engaged. If any emotions start to create sensations in your neck, you are so not in intuition. So that, and know that it's time to let that mud settle and to make those clear decisions and that sort of gut knowing that's very deep. If you are struggling with freeze to the degree that you literally can't take a single action, and you are one of those people watching right now that are like, what I'm dealing with freeze, it's not like, it's unhealthy, then I'm going to tell you what to do with freeze. Freeze needs intense levels of presence. I mean intense levels of presence. It needs non-movement, actually. That's what people don't usually know. So somatic experiencing is perhaps the very best experience that you can engage in order to take yourself out of the freeze. To do that, you want to be sitting in a chair or laying down, and then you want to close your eyes and you get intensely still. I want you to focus all of your attention just towards what's happening on a somatic level in your body. It's going to feel like cement. Now sometimes a freeze happens on the outside of really intense emotions, so there is sometimes, especially with shock, intense movements on the inside of that sensation and almost no movement on the outside. Either way you work this, you want to bring your consciousness into that frozen state. If we look at energy within the body, kind of like water, it has these different forms. You've got the vapor form of water, steam, which is more like an air. You've got the liquid form, which is the healthiest, we could say, for the human body. And we've got, which is whenever you're in that state of ice, you have to bring your full attention to it with this idea that your consciousness itself is almost like a light beam that's going to be slowly melting the ice. But if you've ever introduced light to ice and watched how slowly it begins to drip and how slowly you get like the most minuscule type of movement, that's the type of presence and patience you have to have with the freeze state. And you want to sit with it and sit with it and sit with it until naturally you start to feel that solid stuckness become like a little bit more like water. Yeah, so that's the most important thing I think I could say about that. Blake is of course telling me to have something else in mind. Alright, so let's talk about preparing for the worst, yeah? it's going to be really hard for those of you that are engaged in mind creates reality processes, because I think everybody probably in the spiritual field that's on board with this type of thing is you don't feed into it. Stop feeding into the fear, the worst case scenarios. Simply get in your mind what you want to create, and magically that's going to happen. There's a whole other type of person, which is the majority of people on Earth, and by the majority I mean like I've probably met 83 people in my lifetime capable of pure focus. So some of you will get into a car, and when you put on your seatbelt, suddenly that causes you to release resistance. And so you're able to focus on what you want to create, and you're not thinking about getting in a car wreck 24/7 when you're driving. That's going to be kind of how preparing for the worst in this type of a situation is going to go for you. For a great many of you, I feel like if there is a level of preparation, it's going to release some of your resistance because you won't get into the panic. That being said, preparing for the worst, many of you can see, into where this is going to go based on what the economy is doing. Preparing for the worst tends to throw people into absolute panic. It makes them more narcissistic. When I did this recent release on the video about COVID-19, that's exactly what I was saying. Not only is this particular pandemic a manifestation of a narcissistic way of thinking in the world, this fear that is causing us to see where the world is basically headed right now and to try to make preparations for it can just as easily throw us into even greater levels of narcissism. So I had a lot of people who were really interested in hearing about greed today. I'm really not interested in talking about greed specifically, because all this is an intense desire that is basically motivated by self-centered concerns. It's not possible, actually, to be selfless. That's something that I wish that I could convey to people. Of course, this is going to cause confusion, but what I mean is there's no such thing as a selfless motive within you. The problem that we have is not that. The problem that we have is that we don't recognize everything in the universe as self. So I want you who are watching this that are enough to begin this shift. The shift is from it's possible to be selfless, it's not. And the problem is it's not. The problem is the capacity to understand that everything is you. I want you to really think about that, because it's going to show you react in this particular scenario. This is what I mean by that. Stockpiling to a certain degree right now in terms of resources is actually a very good idea. When you go to do that, obviously you got to think of the fact that everything around you, especially in the area that you live, they're part of you. So the question that you want to ask yourself when you go about doing this is, if everyone was doing exactly what I'm doing right now, what would happen? It's really important at this particular time that when we're going about taking these actions that are smart preparatory actions right now, are we going to deprive somebody else of their most basic needs by doing that? And I want people to be good about their actions like that. So if you're in this phase where you understand a lot of people are going under quarantine and things like that, if you're in a space where you're understanding that you're having to begin stockpiling or begin having preparation for food when you can't leave your house, it's important to be doing that in steps, obviously. That makes it not only easy on the suppliers of food, right, but on other people. So let's say that right now you decide, you know what, it's really smart to have 2 weeks, 1 month, however many months of food supply. You should be doing incrementally. Also preparing, a lot of people aren't actually preparing well enough if they're being put on quarantine and being isolated like this. They're not preparing well enough on an emotional and mental level. I think those of you that watch my videos understand just how important for overall health, mind, and emotions are. I'm going to think it's more important even than physicality. This is not something, of course, that the world is considering right now. The world is pretty much considering one thing only, and that's survival. They're not really thinking about the well-being of people emotionally. So if you can, that's what I mean by prepping for the worst. I want you to be thinking about, in the worst case scenario, what would be the very best thing for me emotionally and mentally. In the worst case scenario, what would be the best thing physically, and to have a plan for that. So what I'm encouraging people who are really to do is to have a best case and a worst case plan. And I'm actually going to all of you that today. It takes a lot for me to get to the point where I'm about to tell a whole bunch of you that. I think some of you are starting to feel exactly what I was talking about when I wrote in the very first sentence of my 2020 blog that this was the year that I was afraid to write about 4 years. Basically, there's no way to avoid economic collapse, as you guys know. Even the decisions that have been made already, they can't pull back. So I wish to go in a direction with you of an understanding, and this is the understanding. Human beings have asked for a change. They've been subconsciously asking for it for a very long time. Those of you who are into shadow work understand how painful that change can be. There has to be a shaking apart of existing structures for it to take its place. And our big question that we have to answer for ourselves individually right now is, what should that be? What do I really want this world to look like? Because right now, we're doing exactly the same thing that anybody does when an old pattern is coming up in order to be completely shifted. We're starting to cling to what we know. Clinging to what we know is going to work for us at all. So it's about, all right, the existing structures, a lot of them that have been in place, are most likely going to fall. So what would I want to replace it? And it's about taking action towards those types of things. That's building the building part of this whole discussion that I had with you, as preparing for the worst, earthquake-proofing the building type of scenario. To keep you actually, if you want my honest truth. I mean, obviously, when you're preparing for the worst when it comes to entertaining your emotional and mental comfort, part of that should definitely be entertainment. But there's plenty to do aside from distraction, you know. Those of us who are here going through this type of a thing want to really be focusing our energy towards what to create. Believe me, there's plenty there to be focused on. All right. I'm trying to vet these things. Have a little bit of patience with it here. Oh, so somebody here is asking, how can I even know what is in someone else's best interest? Wait, I'm going to answer that question second. Sorry, I'm getting some intuition here. Some of you are interested exactly why or how this is happening to the human race within this mirror construct that is the universe. I'm going to have to break this to you. I'm really, okay. I'm having a hard time figuring out how to explain this in a way that's not going to cause people to feel really bad about themselves. So what I'm wanting is for humanity to be integrated instead of rejected. The human race right now on planet Earth is behaving like a parasite, or it's behaving a little bit more like a cancer cell. It's not responding to the normal signals that would make it cohabitable with the rest of the resources on Earth. Anytime that happens within a greater system, and we have to acknowledge we as humanity are a unit of a bigger system. We could call that bigger ecosystem Earth, we could call that bigger ecosystem the universe itself. Anytime there is an errant cell or an errant organism that does not benefit the totality of the group, it is targeted. Now one of the ways, this is one of the reasons, by the way, why there's so much focus from other beings within the universe on Earth right now, is because there's a great desire to get that cell that is the human race acting like a parasite or like a cancer to come back into alignment and into harmony with the rest of the ecosystem that it is a part of. Now, the greatest tool that the universe has currently for awakening, for self-awareness, is a mirror construct. So what it will end up doing to something that is that far off is that it will trap it in a mirror hologram. I can kind of, if you imagine a person being trapped in a bubble, and the inside of that bubble is a 360-degree mirror, you can kind of imagine what type of intensification would happen when you have yourself all around you. Now, the human race right now is behaving in a completely narcissistic way. It was what I was saying in my last update about why this pandemic happened in the first place. They're not taking the best interests of each other in as part of themselves. Internally, they're fragmented. I could go on and on and on, but what this creates is I'm not taking other people's or other things within this ecosystem best interest as a part of me. So if the universe traps them in a mirror hologram, all they become a match to is that which they are. So what you're going to be watching within the world right now, because of what the universe is doing to humanity right now, believe me, not only for its own good, but the good of the universe at large, is trapping it in that mirror hologram. And if human beings are in a narcissistic state, what is going to magnify in terms of the reflection in that mirror trap? The answer is people acting in their own best interests. So this is where your empowerment comes in here. Your empowerment is about your capacity to change that reflection. And I know it can feel powerless when other people aren't doing that. I mean, a lot of you are seeing the way that people are responding to this and are in absolute fury about the fact that when they're met with the reflection of, I'm not going to consider you, that they're just reacting with the same thing. I'm not going to consider you. You know, you've got people who are fighting over toilet paper now and all that kind of stuff. But I want to leave you with this. You do have power to change that reflection. You absolutely do. And when you change that reflection, you're going to be influencing absolutely everybody in your life. I wish personally that what I could do is to show you the ripple effect of when you change a single way that you're behaving, the way you're thinking, the actions you're taking. So knowing that you're trapped in a mirror hologram right now, what do I want that mirror to reflect is the single most important question you will ask yourself this year. Do I want that mirror hologram around me to reflect hoarding? Do I want that mirror hologram to reflect kindness? Do I want that mirror hologram to reflect narcissism? Do I want that hologram to reflect connection? This is the question. And if you want it to reflect that, you've got to become that. It may sound dorky, but it is one of the most powerful things ever said in history by any man. You become what you want to see in this world. And that is especially hard when the universe is putting this level of pressure on you. I do have respect for that. Can they not hear me or something?
It could be better.
Blake is trying to fix the audio. That is not my area of expertise. Oh, I did want to say this. So, stepping back a tiny bit, we've got more questions about regret. Regret is really about not knowing whether the decision you make is going to be right or not. And like I said, as so much of the information is changing so fast that flexibility is key. It's absolutely key. And I need you to get, those of you who are panicked about, oh, I'm the one that can't make the right decision. No one can right now, you guys. No one. No one is going to be able, in an ocean of changeable information all the time, to be able to make the perfect decision for them. We are all in the same ocean of uncertainty, and in an ocean of uncertainty, flexibility is literally everything. So I want you to wrap your head around the fact that the person who's going to do the best through this is the person who can change course in half a second, but do so from an intentional space, not a space of pure reactivity. We still having problems?
No, I'm just going to tell them something really quick. So just for you guys, we're recording this and we're going to be putting it up later. But also, if you swipe right on the comments and hide the comments, that's seeming to help the kind of audio jumping that's happening. So just to let you know.
All right. This is an interesting one, and I think a lot of us can find ourselves in this situation right now. Do you have any suggestions for practices for what to do if you always find yourself stuck in lose-lose scenarios and compromises? Most of us are going to be put in a lose-lose here, if we're not in one already. I know a lot of people around the world are losing their jobs right now, for example. All right, lose-lose situations, let's talk about this for a little bit, because a lose-lose scenario is a design for self-awareness. Self-awareness within this universe, as we know, was the ultimate priority for a very long time. Still is, kind of. What I mean by this is that when you know what is unwanted, you know what is wanted. So the universe is trying to get to know itself by people sort of sorting through the contrast of existence, not just people, all beings, sorting through the contrast of existence so as to figure out what is wanted and then go in the direction of that, create that. That creation gives rise to new desires. We go in the direction of that, away from what's unwanted, and now we create something new. And this is what we call expansion. Expansion happening on a personal level, expansioning throughout the universe as well. So you can understand that wanted and unwanted is a design for self-awareness. Right? We know what we want. We know what we are. the thing is that there's an even better design for self-awareness, and that's the lose-lose scenario. What that is deciding between two consequences. It's deciding between unwanted and unwanted. And if anybody's ever been in that type of a scenario, that should be all of you, you will know that nothing tells you more about yourself than when you're forced to choose between two consequences and have to see what your actual priorities are. I know that kind of sucks, but it's also meant to teach freedom. Freedom is one of the most critical concepts to grasp within the greater universe at large. It's not just something that the universe is trying to teach you. It is a principle within the universe at large, just like love is. We know that source consciousness is love. We know that source consciousness is choice. That's free will that we're talking about. And a lose-lose is meant to teach you freedom by putting immense amounts of pressure on you. A lot of you are going to be struggling with lose-lose scenarios if you have a failure to see the third option. I'm going to be talking, probably for the rest of the year, about how much of what we're experiencing has to do with a narcissistic mental state. The lack of considering of other as a part of oneself. If nobody in your life ever tried to find a third option, I'm not talking a compromise. I'm talking something that's a yes for you and a yes for me. If nobody was in that practice, then you have a failure to see the third option. You're going to be the type of person who sees your best interests and their best interests as states that you're powerless to change. And that will continue to line you up with situations where you experience a lose-lose. So a lot of this is about healing those earliest experiences where nobody considered your best interests and nobody took them as a part of your own. For those of you that don't know already, I have a whole process that is created specifically for overcoming this type of trauma. It's called the completion process. I wrote a book on it. It's quite literally titled The Completion Process. But I also have completionprocess.com where you can find practitioners who can lead you through this process. One of the things I have to say here with being stuck in lose-lose situations is that the universe will tend to walk you towards these types of scenarios the more that it's interested in you integrating your Achilles heel. Now, what do I mean by Achilles heel? That's basically whatever in your life puts so much pressure on you that it causes you to cave and causes other people to get their way every time. So I think that if you find yourself in a lose-lose situation, you should figure out what your Achilles heel is, and really, with all the time you've got on your hand, most likely, really focus on integrating that Achilles heel. Because it'll be much harder for the universe and for the people who are a part of the universe to put you in lose-loses if you don't have that Achilles heel anymore. Okay, so there's your question. I wrestle sometimes with feeling like the spiritual community bypasses the evil and corruption in the world, but then I feel pessimistic to dwell on it. How do you find a healthy balance between being aware and prepared for the worst while not actually manifesting the worst case scenario? Well, okay, so for my answer, it's about that. It's about being in that energy with the building. Remember that I told you about? You're going to build the building as if an earthquake's going to happen and that thing could fall down, at the same time as building something that you actually are wanting. The spiritual field is a coping mechanism. Most people only use it for avoidance. Which, by the way, I'm going to get into that even further in a minute. But it's really super important, obviously, to be in awareness of what is going on here. But I think that when you start to become pessimistic and like, I don't know what to do about the fact that I hate the world because of what's happening, it's really important to have empathy for the human ego. If you are familiar with your own ego, then it becomes a little bit easier to be compassionate towards the ego of others. This that we are calling evil and this that we're calling corruption is nothing more than the striving to keep yourself safe. That was interesting. Yeah, the striving to keep yourself safe is what makes people evil. There really is no such thing as evil in this world. Every time you get into the perspective of something that we could call quote-unquote evil, there's intense amounts of vulnerability and, let's call it, less than beneficial methods for keeping that vulnerability safe. Well, here's an interesting one. Is it true that the ability to love yourselves can easily be lost in childhood? I mean, we're so young that we have no chance to take notice of it. I'm going to be even more aggressive about that. I'm going to say, yeah, if you don't love yourself, you have lost your access to it in childhood. Like, that's without fail. I don't know whether you want me to elaborate on that, because it's literally just, is it true that the ability of to love ourselves can easily be lost in our childhood? It is always lost in our childhood. It is lost through the process of socialization that takes place within a household. These are really good questions, guys. I like these. Alright, people not voicing their emotions and living with the attitude to cover everything under a pretty happy blanket makes me so aggressive. It literally feels like I'm suffocating in their presence. I want to find empathy and offer them understanding, but I just can't seem to. How can I deal with this for myself and still not take it so personally? I'm going to have a very short answer for you, because kind of like old spiritual masters used to give you a cone in order to work with it yourself. I'm going to give you a short answer here. You ready for this? And by the way, you're not alone in this. I think most of us who are on this particular call, and most of you who resonate with my material at all, feel the same way about people who love to stuff things under pretty happy blankets. Okay, so this is my answer to your question. If you want to get into a space of understanding and empathy around this, you have to recognize that obviously, first and foremost, it hurt you. Most likely you were in a space of extreme amounts of pain, right? And people were whitewashing over it, and so you couldn't get any rescue. But what you have to be recognizing is that your desire for truth is coming from the exact same place and for the exact same reason as their desire for denial. It's your cone. Okay. Oh, this is so much fun. Oh, the woo, this is good. Okay. Can selective identification be in service of integration? If someone selectively identifies with an empowered aspect of self, which gets them unhooked from a victimized aspect of self, and raises their vibration that way, then from there they seem to be in a better position to integrate. Can short-term selective identification put you in a position for better long-term integration? No. Hell no. This is choosing, actively choosing separation, thinking that separating from this part of yourself is going to get you somewhere. It's totally not. It is totally not. Now, there's a big difference between what we would call balancing out or what we would call exaggerating certain aspects of self. It's not like this. Let me give you an example. Once you begin to integrate all your internal parts, you have incredible resources to be using. So let's say that I've got an incredibly intellectual part. I can, given a certain scenario, choose to bring that aspect of myself forward so that I'm using that resource for whatever I'm facing in the world. The important thing is that when I do that, I'm not doing it to get away from another aspect of myself or to get to a place where I can then integrate an aspect of myself. It's still an abandonment. What I'm trying to get people away from is to stop abandoning themselves. So, if you want to do this at any point, like you want to utilize an internal resource and an internal part to get you into a situation because the resource that it has the capacity to do that, the first thing you have to do is to talk to the opposite aspect that you're thinking about getting away from, which most of you are calling the victimized aspect. You have to talk to the victimized aspect and get it to agree to that part doing so that it is the one also consciously choosing that part takeover as opposed to you just bulldozing the living hell out of it. That's your answer. By the way, usually these victimized aspects, once they know how doing so is in their best interest, will get on board. Okay, this is interesting because I've got two people who are asking about self-love and loneliness. All right, here's one of the questions. How are self-love and loneliness related? Oh. I wish I had a demonstrating tool. All right, I can't shatter this because it's made of plexiglass. I'm going to fail at that, but let's do this. See this? Imagine that this pane of glass is the totality of this universe, meaning there is nothing that is not this glass. Now imagine that I shatter this, or more accurately, this thinks a thought that shatters itself. Now I'm not dealing with one unified piece of glass, am I? I'm basically dealing with multiple shards. So I've got shards of glass in my hand now. each shard of glass still has the same qualities as this glass, because it's just a piece of it. Free will is one of those things that is a quality of it. That means that if free will is a quality of the glass and you fragment the glass, each individual piece has free will. Oh no, now we can be in a state of opposition. So let's look at loneliness. I had to give you that bigger story, right? Because what I'm talking about there with the breaking of the glass or the breaking of the unification is separation. That's all loneliness is. Loneliness is nothing more than separation. And love is the opposite. To love is to take something as a part of the self. So to love is for all those pieces to come back together into the main glass, but to do so with their free will. So what we have to understand this is that when it fragmented like this, each little part of that overall whole could be seen as a fractal, like a fractal of the greater universe at large. Why is this super important? Because that same fragmenting is going to be happening inside the fragments that happened in the overall picture of fragmentation. Ooh, this is a big deal, you guys, when you get this. So what did I just say? Separation, which is the opposite of love, right? What does that mean if you are a fractal of source and you yourself are fragmented? It means that self-love is the opposite of internal separation, which is actually what's causing that sensation of loneliness. Okay, so look, you're feeling loneliness for the same reason that source itself felt loneliness. That suddenly when it cracked, it had the capacity to perceive something other than itself, and yet there was nothing, was there? So what's creating the sensation of loneliness within source consciousness? Is it the fact that it has, if source is all energy that ever existed and ever will and it's infinite, therefore there's nothing for it to be in relationship with, then what's causing that sensation of loneliness isn't actually that. It's the perception that there could be other, which happened the second that fragmentation happened within itself. So that means that genuinely loneliness happens, that sensation of loneliness, when internal fragmentation has happened. Self-love is the opposite of internal fragmentation. So self-love is the remedy to loneliness. Now it just so happens, obviously, that when you start to integrate these fragments within yourself, remember, we're a fractal within the greater universe. The greater universe has to reflect it. That's why when you start to integrate these fragments, suddenly you get friends, lovers, harmony. I have a more in-depth explanation of this in my book called Anatomy of Loneliness. And yes, you guys caught me. The reason that I wrote the book, The Anatomy of Loneliness, was for this year. So if you're interested in those concepts, I would pick up a copy of that book. Like I said, a lot of you are going to have a lot more time than you did before. I hope it wasn't too complicated. Was that too complicated for people to comprehend?
It was mind-blowing.
Okay, so my first response is to push against what is happening in the world. I want to attack anyone who's perpetuating the mass fear and hysteria. Is there a way to even become soft in a state like this? Can working on resistance even do anything for me in this situation? The single best tool, and yeah, by the way, dealing with your own resistance is always going to work, but the single best tool you can use for this is how do I deal with the other person's fear? Talk about getting out of your narcissistic bubble. It's so critical to switch into this attitude of, all right, people are being unsafe because they feel unsafe. You get that, right? People are going to rob somewhere because they don't feel like they have enough resources. People are going to try to stockpile, obsessively and in a really negative way, stockpile food because they're terrified. So if the root of all of these horrific behaviors you're seeing in the world is fear, then your empowerment is about how can I help to soothe their fear? How can I help them to release resistance? I love this one. Oh, this is good. I'm more anxious on a normal day than when we have a global pandemic. Why the hell is this? Okay. I'm laughing for a reason. This is really funny. Okay, this is why. You can consider people who have been super anxious and have panic a lot to be like your weight trainers for an event. Those of you who spend most of your time anxious, right, have had so much practice with this that you're perfectly prepared for panic. That's number one. Number two, people who are anxious on a normal day, they get into this cycle that happens with panic, which is that you tell yourself stories that actually makes the panic worse. This is what I mean by that. If you get into a high-speed car wreck and you have a full-blown panic attack, your first thought is, this makes sense. It's not like the sensations happening in your body are like, this doesn't make any sense. What's wrong with me? I shouldn't be feeling this way. No, it's gonna make sense. It's in context, right? But so many of you who have been feeling anxious are actually tapped into the collective conscious, and you know exactly where this crap is headed. So I've been dealing with this for about a year, 2 years, even 4 years. The people have this like chronic anxiety, but they don't have any context for it. So what's happening right now with what's happening in the world is they're suddenly, oh, there's not something horrifically wrong with me for being anxious. Now it's in context. So that's one of the reasons, or maybe the main reason, why people who were actually anxious in normal times, more anxious than this, feel less anxious now. You don't think you're nuts anymore, do you? Okay, here's a question. How do we stay in alignment with these periods of isolation? Especially when they're happening, creating distance when we have to stay at home by law. Okay, the answer here is that you got to get really, really familiar with your needs, and you got to try to find those ways to meet those needs in creative ways and in any way that you possibly can. I've been speaking a lot about the fact that technology, this type of relating, has a lot of unhealthy aspects to it, but there's also a real healthy aspect to it. If the government that you're in shuts you down and says you got to keep social distance, this is the way to connect. And believe me, if your need is connection, you should be using this to within an inch of its life, right? So that's just one example of a need that, and how you can meet it. You want to stay healthy. Obviously, you've got a lot of physical needs. So making sure that you continue to exercise, making sure that you're not just eating freeze-dried food. That's something that a lot of people are doing right now when they're trying to get food. They're like, oh no, I got to go for like the peanut butter jar. It's very smart to go for foods that are non-perishable to a degree. Your body still needs that, like those fresh foods and things like that. So as long as you still have access to that, you got to make sure that you're staying healthy in that way. So if I were any of you who are being forced into these periods of isolations, I'd be sitting down and making a needs list. And then I would be brainstorming and even involving other people in this brainstorming as to how to get those needs met in alternative ways that are within the boundaries of the law. So far. Somebody says, for me it feels like we're going to come out on the other side of this crisis and be in a better place collectively. Am I even in reality? Is it going to take a very long time, or could it potentially be soon? For me, it's hard to answer this question because you're not in reality. No. What it is that we can be in a better place collectively, but the question is short-term or long-term. I have the belief, obviously, we don't go through this type of stuff to just end up in crap. It's not like the universal intention for all this is just, well, the humans can be screwed and that's the end of it, and then just go down the crap can and that, no. Like, this is an intense boiling point. It's like when the pressure gets turned up so far that people have to actually choose in alignment with their actual values. So what happens out of those types of experiences is what you're saying. It's that collectively humankind ends up in a better place. But what happens in the short term is the exact opposite. It's that pressure cooker. It's basically people being intensely put in the hurt locker to a degree where they have to choose what really matters. For this reason, we can go back to this truth that humankind, when it's put in this state, polarizes. I mean, go back to the 2020 blog I wrote. This whole year is about conflict. It's all about polarization. When we get this amount of pressure put on us, humankind has the capacity to bring out the best and the worst of itself, and you're going to see both. It's going to be real painful to watch some of that, and it's going to be real beautiful to watch some of that. And the question you got to ask yourself is, which side of that do I want to be on? And when I say that, I'm being real careful, because this should not be a Light Workers Unite thing. I hate that. This Light Workers Unite thing is like, let's not be that and let's be this. It's still fragmentation. What I mean by standing powerfully on the side of what you want to create includes integrating those aspects. The part of me that wants to steal things, the part of me that is so scared right now that I want to buy a gun, you know, all these aspects that are going to be coming up. We've got to really powerfully own those as a part of all of ourselves. And by really powerfully owning all of those as a part of ourselves, we're actually put in a place of choice. How do we caretake those aspects of ourselves that are extremely vulnerable? How do we make the right choices in order to stay in alignment, in order to stay safe, in order to get those needs met, in order to create what we want to create here, without pushing people and things away from ourselves? I do want to mention something before I go on here. Like, some of these questions are so good, and there's no way in hell I'm going to answer them in a short amount of time as I have on this workshop. So it's important for a lot of you to know that I've already decided. I've got a few episodes that I want to put out in the short term, but I've decided that as long as this conflict is happening, I'm going to be teaching to things that are relevant to what's happening in the world, you know. Like, really, that's pretty focused at this particular point. So a lot of your questions that you've submitted, I'm going to make whole episodes. You know, things like struggling with hating humanity and what to do with feeling like they're destroying everything and you have no control over that. Stuff like that. That's another one I gotta answer. And another one. Ooh, these are so good. Wow. Okay, the virus panic has trapped me in a house living with my dysfunctional family. How the hell do I navigate this experience and find the most peace while feeling forced to stay here? You find yourself in a position that so many people are going to find themselves. Between you and me, one of the very first thoughts that I had when I found out that people were being put on lockdown is, what is going to happen in dysfunctional homes? It's the kid who's stuck there with an alcoholic parent who is a rage monster, who is put under so much stress that they are going to engage in whatever addictive behavior that they've got going and take it on the whole family. The answer is, it's time to master relationships. By the way, the computer's dying. I don't know if you want to do anything about that. You gotta master relationships. You caught me again. This is another reason why I have been teaching so much about relationships in the previous years. Here's the good news. I have so many videos on how to master relationships, it's not even funny. It is not even funny. If you start to practice that within the home, that's everything. But for you specifically, the reason that you've been trapped there with the family in this particular circumstance is in order to be forced to master relationships and to powerfully own the members of your family that you've internalized but are parts that you hate about yourself. So let's say that you've got a parent who's like a blamer, and that constantly is hurting you within the household. This is your time to integrate the part of you that blames. And when you integrate the part of you that blames, you start to know how to deal with a person on the external who is a chronic blamer. Going to a second list of questions. Oh, this isn't okay. How can I inspire my 21-year-old daughter to look inward for her truth and guidance rather than look outward, i.e. social media entrenchment and comparison, material possession, and making educational decisions based on future salary? The answer to this is very simple. It's to help her to feel liked and lovable, especially the parts about herself that you can tell she doesn't like and isn't lovable. It's not a good strategy with somebody, especially in her particular vibe, to be giving her lectures about how important it is to not do what she's doing, because that's going to just decrease her confidence again. So, you know, if I was to see somebody who is looking, for example, to the social media stuff for awareness about how to be liked more, that's all that she's doing right now, right? And what she needs to have be liked more is body, I, as a mother, would spend a lot of time feeding her information about her body that's positive. And I would own up to the areas in which I may have messed that the hell up. It's really hard as a parent to own the ways that you messed up and to own the ways that you created the very patterns that you're now frustrated in with your child. You know, like for example, there are parents who don't recognize that they try to train their children into not being self-centered, not wanting attention and things like this, and those kids tend to be forced into suppressing and denying their needs to such a degree that they develop this deep hole inside them for fame. And then that same parent shames them for wanting fame, and it becomes like this self-perpetuating loop. So if you can get out of this in terms of consciousness, as a parent, it's about looking at looking at what she's wanting by doing all of this thing so that you don't like. How do I own my adding to that in her childhood in a way where I can take responsibility for it and then change the behavior? Because like it's real confusing for kids, even though it's better than any of these other options, and it's better than not doing anything. It's really confusing for kids when parents send double messages. I mean, and it's going to happen because people evolve, you know. You're not going to have the same parents when you're 20 as you had when you were 5. There may be a parent who like spanks like crazy, and then all of a sudden with grandkids they're like, spanking's awful. And as a kid watching that, or a grown-up kid watching that, you're kind of like, that's a gaslight. So as parents, because this is what you are, it's super important to like own, look, I see that this is where you are and where you're suffering from. This is what I messed up with, and this is why I'm changing this behavior, and it helps them to consciously snap out of it. So that, and just literally showering them with liking and loving and the likability and lovability of those things that she's trying to get through altering herself and material possessions and social media advice is my answer. This person says, I like to think that I'm somewhat authentic to the degree that I've discovered myself. I fear inauthenticity in others. Can you explain why? You fear inauthenticity in others because it's dangerous. It makes perfect sense to me. When somebody is in a state of inauthenticity, then you don't even know what you're going to be doing with the information that you're fed. You know what I mean? It's like what we said. It's ironic because it's like a mirror of what's happening in the universe at large right now. If I tell you I love pink, but I really hate pink, and you get me something pink, and it really matters to you whether you're rejected or not, suddenly that's an issue. People make decisions based off of truth. So if somebody's not feeding you the truth, quite honestly, you're going to make the wrong decisions. Inauthenticity makes people dangerous. That's why you fear it. I've been in consecutive long-term relationships my entire adult life, and I'm realizing how unsafe I feel without a primary partner now that I'm single for the first time. Would it be more self-loving to figure out how to feel safe in my autonomy for a while, or go towards my desire, which you're calling a compulsion here, for another relationship immediately? 10 seconds. Okay, in your particular circumstance, it's really important not to avoid your desire, in fact. So I don't want you to be like intentionally keeping yourself separate from people, because that's not the issue. The issue isn't you getting into consecutive relationships and issues with dependence and all that crap. What it is that you suffer from overlays. An overlay is a coping method that makes it so you can't see the reality of the people you're with, and that's why you keep getting into breakups with all these successive partners rather than developing a safe relationship that might last with someone. So my answer, I have a whole video on this. But my suggestion for you specifically during this time is to really, really look at your capacity to cope through overlays and disrupt that whole thing and not avoid getting into another relationship. Is there a way to form a relationship that's 100% safe? I want intimacy and closeness, but I struggle with finding people who can support me with emotional presence. I then distance myself from people. I find I'm in a constant battle of separation. Well, this is kind of a philosophical debate. The answer to this question is a philosophical thing, because we are in separate bodies. And remember how I gave that example of that glass, that piece of glass, where when you fragment it, suddenly all the fragments of that greater glass all have free will, and so that free will can be in a state of opposition. Remember how I said that? How that plays out in the physical world for us is that we have separate concepts of self. We have separate identities. We have separate physical bodies even. And so that separation that creates the self means we can have free will, means we can be in opposition to each other. And so there is a level or a degree of unsafety in being separate in and of itself. That being said, that was something you did sign up for. It's like a lot of us can deal with the pressure of certain levels of risk and certain levels of unsafety, and you absolutely opted into that upon coming into a separate physical body. What we're talking about here, I feel like you're talking about here, is that, and that's what I mean by 100% safe. But is there a way to form a relationship that feels safe? My answer is 100% yes. It's dependent upon you and the other person in the relationship taking the other person as a part of yourselves. When you do that, their best interests are part of your best interests. So it's not going to be okay for you to watch them suffer any more than it's going to be okay for them to watch you suffer. It's an end to the zero-sum game. It is not possible, if you do that, to create a lose-lose. It's not possible. And that's what makes a relationship safe. It is absolutely possible. I wouldn't be teaching you guys any of the stuff I was if it was not possible. So what can I do? The answer is learn how to do that with other people so that you end the zero-sum game. They're telling me that I'm out of time, but I want to see if there's anything really important that I've got to answer, like have to answer. This is fun. Okay. Doing spiritual practices, for instance, meditation, yoga, asana, breathing practices, kundalini, woo, aren't you dedicated, often has a really beneficial effect on my life, both in that moment and cumulatively over time. However, I've gotten to a stage where I can feel a bit trapped, like I can't feel good and aligned unless I maintain this schedule of practices. Something's ringing, I can't hear it either. Like that.
Still?
10 seconds. I hope all of you can hear that. That's like extra obnoxious. There we go. Alright, going back to this. Doing spiritual practices, meditation, yoga, asana, breathing practices, kundalini has a beneficial effect on my life, both in that moment and cumulatively over time. However, I've gotten to a stage where I can feel a bit trapped, like I can't feel good and aligned unless I maintain this schedule of practices. Any advice? If you're in a position where you can't feel good unless you do X, Y, Z, D, blah, 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 like you're saying, it means that you're using these things to cope. Now, why is coping an issue? I'm going to tell you why. Because coping, by definition, means that you think you can't change something. So it means that you're using it to bury a reality. So like, let's look at prison. I'm in prison. I'm trapped. I'm stuck. I can't get out. So I would be doing all these things to cope with the pain, that pain I just mentioned, of those conditions. Now, if somebody is doing all these practices like this and can't feel good another way, it means you're coping with something, which means you're basically washing over something that needs to be looked at. Most people tend to cope like this when they have suppressed so deeply what it is that's causing them to suffer that they just feel the emotional remnants of that rise, and then they kind of stuff it down by doing these types of practices. And it's so common that people use spiritual practices this way. So it's really important for you to go in the opposite direction that you've been going. What is it, if I was in your position, what is it that is underneath all of these things that comes up when I'm not doing them? So if I was in your particular position, I know it's pretty hard to ask you to do right now in the world, but if I was in your kind of a position, what I would do is stop doing those things for like a day, 2 days, 3 days. And when that discomfort and whatever arises as a result of doing that, I would make 100% sure that I go into it, that I sit with it, that I try to really become conscious of what's underneath it, that I'm trying to get away from. Because we love to use coping mechanisms when we think we're powerless in situations that we're not actually powerless. We just think we can't change things. But unless we go into it and really become aware of it, we can't actually alter it. And I would rather you be living in a life where you could or you couldn't. It's kind of like an additive to your life rather than something that you've got to do or else you're down in that pain. If that makes sense. I like this one. I'm working as a scientist, but I'm also very much into spirituality. Part of me feels that this is a contradiction, and towards colleagues I'm ashamed of my beliefs. How can I accept myself fully? Actually, to accept yourself fully in this particular circumstance, you're going to have to see the shadow in science. Now, a real good scientist, a scientist that deserves to call themselves a scientist, is going to be somebody that's open to not knowing. This is going to be somebody who's going to be open to everything, including spirituality, because they have not figured out the universe yet. Most scientists, not most, many scientists, act more like people who come from a fundamental religious group. Because this is what I want you to grasp. Science is a way of looking at the world. It is a way of observing. It is a way of experimenting so as to have a greater understanding of what is happening. Because science is a way of observing and measuring the world, it is simply just one more way of looking at it. So is spiritual practice. Now, science may have a little bit less of a limited perspective sometimes than other ways of looking at the world, but it's still one perspective. Objective perspective is much larger than that. And if a scientist can't recognize that, they're not a true scientist. So one way you can accept yourself fully is to get that if you're a kind of person who embraces other ways of looking at the world and not just that one, you're actually more of a scientist than the ones that call themselves scientists. I know everybody wants me to come up. I'm so excited about these questions. All right, I'll do one more. Just let me find it. Oh my god, I'm ending on this one. Haha. All right. There's somebody who's caught a discrepancy in the stuff that I say. You said to follow the joy is the purpose of life. Follow your joy. But you also say, run away from me, meaning Teal, as soon as possible if wanting to feel good is your reason for learning spirituality. It seems like they're completely the opposite. How do I understand this? I love when you guys ask me about discrepancies, rather than just making assumptions. My answer is, coping is different than creation. Okay, I'll maybe explain this. So some people misinterpret what I mean when I say follow your joy. I've taught about the emotional guidance system as a kind of guidance system, right? So if you follow your joy, you're following your compass. I've also told you, though, right, that that's a little dangerous, right? Because even though everyone has a compass, they've been messed with, and so north doesn't really point due north a lot of times. That means it's not 100% reliable, right? But when I say to follow your joy is the purpose of life, I mean something much, much further than that. You ready to expand to the greater universe at large? The universe, the totality of source consciousness, has been playing around long enough that it started to backtrack as to, wait, why did I think that thought? Why did I think that thought? What am I? What are we doing here? Like, it started to ask all these questions. The problem is it actually realized already at this point that it is the one creating everything that it is thinking. So where is it left? If I, as the greater universe, am literally creating things the second that I am wanting to see them, instead of them being something that's innately there, it means that all I am is potential energy. This means there's only one reason to create. Desire. So, at the highest level of universal truth, what happens within source consciousness is creation for the sake of wanting to create. The joy of creation is the answer. That's really what this means. It's a hell of a lot bigger than just do what makes you happy. Even though we could sort of do that on the physical level a little bit more. But That's what I mean by that. Like when I say follow your joy, it's a much larger universal concept that means that with free will, you're really creating everything. So the only reason to do anything is because it feels good to you. Now, from a source perspective, feeling is a little bit funky, but I hope you kind of get that idea. Now, most people in the spiritual world are not creating, okay? They're not making what they want to create. They're trying to escape what they don't want. These are two completely different energies, right? So most people, if I'm standing up on stage at one of these events they hire me to do, I'm sitting in front of an ocean of people who are just like, just say something that makes me feel better. Why would I do that? If I say something in this moment that just makes them feel better, they can go back to their crap marriage and then suffer again and then get uncomfortable and then come for another dose of painkiller and then go back to the crap relationship again and then come back to me for another hit. It's a great way of making money, and it's a really, really unethical type of way of running business. So what I mean by this is that I'm really wanting to help people to follow their, not only create a good internal compass, meaning it's actually pointing due north, and to follow it into expansion. I'm wanting them to get that ultimately the universe, which you're a part of, has decided that the only reason to create something is because you want it to be there, because of what we could call joy, right? I'm also wanting you to understand that the only way to do that is to be in reality, not to be out here in the clouds. And by the way, when I say reality, it's not the same way your parents said reality. I know a lot of your parents are like, be in reality, and it just means be in a crap situation you can't change. No, 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 no. See, reality is you can create things. So that's part of reality. I need people to be in reality because it's the only grounds for personal power. It's the only grounds for actual creation. So coping, right, which is what people really want me to do, is the opposite of creation, which is what I'm telling them to do. Now, I'm the kind of person who brings people into truth. I'm going to tell you the truth so you can use that truth to create exactly what you want to create. That means if you want to not hear truth and you want to just feel good, you should definitely go to a spiritual teacher who's just going to feed you full of feel-good material, not going to tell you the truth, i.e. run away from me. I hope that makes sense. All right. I've gone over, as per usual. But like I said, those of you who didn't get any of your questions answered here, I hope some of what other people submitted helped you here today. I am going to be taking a lot of what you wrote here in order to design the upcoming Is Teal episodes that I'm going to be doing. So I want you to understand that. I also want you to know what I want to leave you with. Yeah, I want to leave you with this again. I want you to leave with the concept, like I said in the beginning, this universe is trapping you in this mirror hologram. It's trapping you inside a reflection of that which you are. So you better be damn sure that you are being what you want to see back. And if you have that in mind when you take your actions, I think that's probably the greatest form of safety you can find in this particular world at this particular time. I will continue to be doing Instagram updates so that you can feel a little bit of guidance and support through this time that we're all facing. And I don't want you to forget, even though it may not seem that way because, you know, they're separating the Christ out of everyone. I am here, okay? I'm here. We're in this together. And right now in the world, I think we're more in this together than we've ever been. I don't know a single person who is actually in reality and not denial who is okay right now. So knowing that, I will be in touch with you guys again whenever it seems appropriate to do that, and definitely tomorrow. Okay, I'm gonna give you Blake. This is our comic relief, by the way.
I don't know, the comic relief seems so out of place right now. It's crazy. I mean, even watching John Oliver, it's like, wow, he's trying to be funny. But it's so serious. Thank you guys. We'll be doing another live stream, but it's going to be through the self-love course at the end of the month. So if you want to join that, we'll be doing the live stream through that. So be sure to go to...
Explain to them that I wanted to do that live stream for people who buy the course so they can help them with what's coming up in the course. Does that make sense?
Right, yeah. I mean, the live stream is for, obviously, it's for what's coming up when you're doing the self-love course. So what's coming up is the blockages, what's coming up to that. So that will be more specific to that. Of course, Teal's going to be updating every day through Instagram, and so be sure to join there, and then more in-depth through the premium. So she'll just keep updating everybody up on just kind of what's happening through the universe and
I'll keep being here
perspective.
with them.
What?
I'll keep being here with them.
Yeah, you'll keep being here. Yeah, we're all here. We're all here in this together, which is what we need to do. So, let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, so that self-love course is going to be 35% off to everyone, and then 50% off to members.
Oh, remind them.
We are uploading this to YouTube later, so those that had audio problems, you can listen to it again if you'd like.
I want you to remind people, because we don't know that this week they're going to be doing a lot more quarantining.
Right.
So I want you to remind them that I wrote that book specifically about loneliness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's really important.
Yeah. I mean, keep talking to people. Keep connecting with people. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like the fact that Teal wrote that book, you know, the loneliness. I mean, it's for this. It's for this quarantine situation, and I'm glad we have the internet, you know, and tools like this, and it's actually a really good opportunity to get into all of this. So it's good to see you all commenting, and I think that's all I have.
I love you guys.
Love you guys. You're beautiful.